The dust of the open prairie, churned into a fine, choking powder, swirled around the worn wheels of the old buckboard wagon. It clung to every surface, coating the dry wood and the sweat-slicked flanks of the two tired horses pulling their load across the vast, sun-scorched landscape. In the harsh light of the late afternoon, 24-year-old Clara sat stiffly on the hard plank seat, her hands clenched so tightly around the handle of her battered valise that her knuckles were white. Her long, honey-blonde hair was plaited in a single, thick braid to keep it from the wind, and her calico dress, though scrubbed clean and meticulously mended, was faded from years of use and washing. Clara had always been a sturdy girl, with broad shoulders and a soft, full figure that stood in stark contrast to the wiry, spare frames of the other women in her town. It was a fact her family had never allowed her to forget, a constant source of their disappointment and her shame. Her father's words from that very morning, spoken with the cold finality of a judge passing sentence, still echoed in her mind, each syllable a fresh cut. "Clara, this arrangement is a mercy. It will settle our debts and see you provided for. Arthur Blackwood needs a wife to help run his ranch, and in your condition, we cannot afford the luxury of being particular about suitors." The words were meant to wound, and they had struck their target with brutal accuracy. Her parents had long since made it clear they viewed her as a millstone around their necks, an unmarriageable daughter whose appetite was a drain on their precarious finances. When the bank had threatened to foreclose on their small mercantile, a consequence of her father's poor speculations, Arthur Blackwood's unexpected proposal had been accepted with unseemly haste. His just a poor dirt rancher, scratching a living from the dust, her mother had sniffed with undisguised disdain, even as she packed Clara's few belongings. "But he has offered to clear our ledger with the bank in exchange for your hand. You will consider it your long overdue contribution to this family, after all the years you have taken from us now." As Clara's father finally reined the horses to a halt, she felt less like a bride and more like a piece of livestock being delivered to a new owner. The ranch house was a simple, unadorned structure of weathered timber, standing stark and lonely against the immense, empty sky. A plume of smoke curled from a stone chimney, the only sign of life. Her father, his face a mask of grim impatience, barely glanced at her as he heaved her valise and a small wooden crate onto the ground. "Blackwood should be about," he grumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Remember your duty, Clara. You are his responsibility now. Do not bring shame upon our name." As if the mention of his name had summoned him, the door of the ranch house opened and two men stepped out onto the porch. The first was a man who looked to be in his early 30s, with a head of thick, dark brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet warmth. He was dressed in the simple, durable clothes of a working man, a faded blue cotton shirt and denim trousers tucked into scuffed leather boots. His frame was solid and powerful, built not by vanity but by years of hard, physical labor, and he moved with the easy, grounded confidence of a man entirely at home in his world. Walking a step behind him was an older man, his face framed by a full, neatly trimmed grey beard. He wore sturdy overalls, and his eyes, the same warm brown as the younger man's, held a gentle, compassionate expression. This, Clara surmised, must be his father. "Miss Fairweather," the younger man said, his voice a surprisingly soft baritone. He descended the porch steps, removing his wide-brimmed hat as he approached. "I am Arthur Blackwood. And this is my father, Gideon. Welcome to our home." Clara was struck silent. She had braced herself for a coarse, desperate man, perhaps one whose gaze would be filled with resentment or, worse, pity. But Arthur Blackwood's eyes held nothing but a calm, sincere kindness. There was no flicker of appraisal, no hint of disappointment. He looked at her as if he were greeting an honored guest. "I understand this is an unconventional arrangement," Arthur continued, choosing his words with care. "And that it may not be what you would have chosen for yourself. But I want to give you my word that you will be treated with only respect and kindness in this house. This is your home now, for as long as you wish it to be." Her father, eager to conclude the transaction, offered a curt nod and a mumbled farewell. He wasted no time in clambering back onto the buckboard, turning the horses around without a backward glance. As the wagon rattled away, shrinking into a dusty speck on the horizon, a profound sense of abandonment washed over Clara. She stood alone in the yard of a stranger, with her meager belongings at her feet and a heart full of fear. "Come," Arthur said gently, his voice breaking through her desolate thoughts. Let us get you inside. You must be weary and thirsty from the journey. As she followed him toward the house, Clara began to truly take in her surroundings. While the house itself was modest, the property it commanded was anything but. Sturdy, well-maintained fences stretched out in every direction, disappearing into the rolling hills. In the distance, she could see a vast herd of cattle grazing peacefully, their dark shapes stark against the golden grasses of the plains. This was no small, struggling plot of land. The interior of the house was another surprise. It was simple, yes, but it was also impeccably clean and far more spacious than she had imagined. The main room was dominated by a large, welcoming kitchen with a massive cast-iron stove and a long, sturdy oak table that could easily seat a dozen people. Polished copper pots hung from a rack on the wall, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke, yeast, and soap. It is not a grand place, Arthur said, a note of apology in his tone. But we do our best to keep it comfortable. Your room is upstairs, the first door you come to. We thought you would prefer your own space and privacy. The door has a lock, of course. Clara blinked, taken aback by his thoughtfulness. She had fully expected to be treated as a hired hand, perhaps given a small cot in a corner. The provision of a private, lockable room was a gesture of respect she had not anticipated. Gideon Blackwood spoke then for the first time, his voice as warm and reassuring as his expression. Clara, my dear, he said, placing a gentle hand on her arm. I want you to know that my son is a good and honorable man. He will never raise a hand or his voice to you, nor do anything to cause you fear. We both hope that, in time, you will come to feel that this is truly your home. That evening, as the three of them sat at the great oak table sharing a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and freshly baked bread, Clara felt the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach begin to loosen. Her entire life, mealtimes had been a source of stress, her every bite monitored and judged. Here, Arthur and Gideon treated her not as an inconvenient mouth to feed, but as an equal. They asked her about her life in town, about the books she enjoyed, and they listened, truly listened, to her answers. They seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, in the person she was beneath the surface her own family had so despised. When she hesitantly mentioned her fondness for reading, Arthur's face brightened with a genuine smile. We have a small library in the parlor, he said eagerly. My mother was a great reader. Please, consider the books your own. I would be very interested to hear what you think of them. In the weeks that followed, Clara discovered that life on the Blackwood Ranch was a world away from the stifling, critical environment she had left behind. Arthur was a tireless worker, rising before the sun to oversee the vast operations of the ranch, yet he never made demands on her. He left her to find her own rhythm, to explore her new home and to decide for herself how she wished to contribute. Slowly, tentatively, she began to carve out a place for herself. She took over the running of the kitchen, finding a surprising joy in cooking wholesome, plentiful meals. She started a vegetable garden in a protected patch of earth behind the house, her hands finding a deep satisfaction in turning the soil and coaxing life from it. Gradually, she came to understand the true scale of what her father had so dismissively called a dirt ranch. Arthur Blackwood was not just a rancher, he was one of the most successful cattlemen in the territory. He owned thousands of acres of prime grazing land, ran a herd of several thousand cattle, and held lucrative contracts to supply beef to army outposts and burgeoning towns across 3 territories. He was a wealthy man, respected for his integrity and his skill. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sky bleed into a spectacular tapestry of orange and purple, she finally found the courage to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind. Why did you let my father believe you were a poor man, struggling to get by? Arthur was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Your father, he said finally, his voice low, made it very clear that he was seeking a financial solution, not a son-in-law. He spoke of you as a commodity. I worried that if he knew the truth of our situation, his motivations would become purely mercenary. I did not want a wife who was sold to the highest bidder. And what were your motivations? Clara asked softly, her heart thumping in her chest. He turned to look at her then, and in the twilight his honest brown eyes were filled with a raw vulnerability. Loneliness, he admitted with a quiet sigh. This land, this life, it has given me a great deal. But it has been an empty house, Clara. Just my father and me. I heard of your family's troubles through an acquaintance in town, and I heard, too, that you were a kind and intelligent young woman being treated poorly. I hoped, that perhaps we could offer each other something the world had denied us. A partnership? A home. As the vibrant heat of summer gave way to the crisp, golden days of autumn, Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of ranch life with a deep and unexpected contentment. Her sharp mind, so long dismissed as useless, found an outlet. She discovered a natural aptitude for bookkeeping and began helping Arthur manage the ranch's complex finances and business correspondence. Her meticulous attention to detail and her quiet intelligence earned her the profound respect of both Arthur and Gideon. More than that, for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and valued. Arthur began to seek her counsel on important decisions, from purchasing new breeding stock to negotiating contracts. Gideon treated her with the gentle affection of a father, often telling her stories of Arthur's childhood and praising her calming, steadying influence on their home. The changes in her were not merely emotional. The constant supply of nourishing food, the wholesome physical labor, and the absence of incessant criticism worked a quiet magic. She was still a large woman, but her frame was now strong and capable. Her posture, once slumped in a perpetual cringe of apology, was now straight and confident. Her skin glowed with health, and her eyes, once dull with unhappiness, now sparkled with a vibrant, inner light. She had not become a different person, she had simply been allowed to become the person she was always meant to be. One frigid December evening, with a blizzard raging outside and a fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, they sat in companionable silence in the parlor, each engrossed in a book. Suddenly, Arthur set his volume down in his lap and turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Clara," he began, his voice hesitant. "I need to say something, and I pray you will not be offended." A familiar chill of fear prickled her skin. Had she overstepped? Had she finally done something to disappoint him? When this arrangement began, he continued, his gaze steady and intense, "I truly believed we could build a fine partnership, a life of mutual respect and convenience. But it has become so much more than that for me." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Somewhere along the way, Clara, I have fallen in love with you. Not as a business partner or a manager of my home, but as the woman I want to share my life with. You have brought a warmth and a light to this house, to my life, that I never knew was missing. You are the kindest, most intelligent, and strongest person I have ever known." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, blurring the sight of his earnest face. "Thomas, You do not have to answer now," he said quickly, misinterpreting her tears. "I do not wish to pressure you. I only wanted you to know the truth of my heart. If you should ever choose to make this marriage real in every sense, you would make me the happiest man on this earth." Clara looked at this kind, decent, honorable man. He had seen past the physical shell her own family had despised and had recognized the worth of the woman within. In 6 short months, he had shown her more compassion and affection than her parents had in 24 years. He had not just given her a home, he had given her back to herself. "I love you, too, Arthur," she whispered, the words feeling as true and solid as the ground beneath them. "You gave me something I had given up all hope of ever finding. A place where I am valued for who I am, not judged for what I am not." The following spring, as wildflowers painted the prairie in a riot of color, they held a second wedding ceremony. It was a small, simple affair, witnessed only by Gideon and a few of the most trusted ranch hands, but it was a true celebration of love and commitment, not a business transaction. Clara, no longer the timid, heartbroken girl who had arrived in a dusty wagon, was a radiant and confident woman, the respected mistress of a thriving ranch, and a true partner to her husband in every way. News of Arthur Blackwood's true wealth and standing eventually filtered back to her hometown. Her family, their mercantile now flourishing thanks to the cleared debts, made an attempt to re-establish contact, their letters filled with false sentiment and cloying sweetness. Clara, with Arthur's unwavering support, politely but firmly declined their overtures. She had learned a profound lesson: true family is not forged by blood or by obligation, but by love, loyalty, and unwavering respect. Years later, as a silver-haired matriarch, Clara would often sit on that same porch, watching her and Arthur's children, strong, kind, and boisterous, play in the very yard where she had once stood, a terrified girl with a single valise and a broken spirit. She would look out over the sprawling, prosperous lands of the Blackwood Ranch and reflect on the strange and wonderful detours of life. Arthur had offered her a home and a future, but he had given her a far greater gift. He had given her the chance to see herself through his loving eyes, and in doing so, allowed her to discover that her true worth had never been measured by the number on a scale or by the cruel, narrow judgments of others. She had found her home not just in the thousands of acres of land, but in the boundless heart of the man who loved her exactly as she was.